Hey folks, welcome to our first lecture for week 3 where we're going to start talking about a different word in the title of the course. We've been spending a lot of time in the last couple of weeks talking about environmental issues, especially in the frame of sustainability. Now we're going to be shifting to the first word in the title of the course, community. And today's lecture really is going to get us kick-started that and link up with the Strand et al. Article on best practices of community-based research that you are assigned to read for class for this week. So before we jump into that, though, I wanted to just say a very quick PSA about staying with the plan in the pandemic. I know you're getting a lot of information and emails from the university about what to do, what not to do, and stuff like that. But, overall, the plan is pretty simple. Wear your masks, be distanced, sanitize your hands, stay safe, all those kind of best practices that you have been practicing so far. And it's working. It's great. I'm really proud of you and the whole community and the way that people have come together and more or less followed the rules so far and kept it going. Let's keep it going. See if we can do the whole semester this way. And really the plan is for you, for the students. I already live in Hamilton, so I didn't necessarily need this plan to be here. I could have taught remote. I'm really happy to be in the classroom with you all. But really, if you want to stay here this semester, let's just keep it going. It's kind of as simple as that in some ways about sticking with that plan. I think a big part of it that we're going to face now that the quarantine is over is sticking around in Hamilton and really, in a way, kind of using the Colgate bubble to our advantage. Once everyone's here and has had a chance to quarantine and we reduce any positive cases to 0 or to the minimum possible, it means that we're kind of protected. We can use our rural location and where we are almost as a form of coronavirus privilege. And the only kind of downside to that is if people really start moving between Hamilton and other places a lot and bring the virus into Hamilton. So let's do our best to just kind of stay here for this semester and maybe don't invite people to come to campus just so that we can kind of stay isolated as a community and therefore stay protected. And then finally, take care of yourself, take care of each other, do check-ins as I've recommended earlier in the semester. And, do the things you need both for your physical and your mental health to stay healthy. If you can do something that really helps you kind of stay physically fit, like exercise, stuff like that, but also mentally fit, do whatever it takes to kind of get you into that good place where you're going to be able to stay mentally and physically healthy through the semester, especially if we are going to be maybe a little bit isolated from family or friends who are in other places. Okay, so let's talk about community. Just like for sustainability, it's kind of a complicated word. It's hard to define. We all sort of know what it means, but if we actually have to try to define it in terms to explain it to somebody else or to start using it as a research variable or term concept, then it gets harder. So the obvious choice is community is a TV show, NBC, 8 o'clock, right? Like that picture? I wasn't sure about that picture, or I kind of like this one too. It's very cute. It has that nice big college community on the top there. So no, obviously that's not what we're talking about community in this class. In this class, we're talking about community as some place for us to do research. And so in that respect, it helps to kind of think about it as a research term and one that, just like we did for sustainability, we can think about it in terms of dimensions. Anytime we're struggling to define, especially in a research context, a word or a concept or an idea, really helps to break it down into subdimensions. So just like for sustainability, we have the 3 pillars. For community, we can kind of do a similar thing and think about what is it that makes up a community? What are the different dimensions of it that we can point to? So first one of those might be that a community shares a set of common values or culture. So there's a cultural dimension here where people maybe feel like they belong somewhere. So you could say that there's community maybe around a college setting like at Colgate or in a small town like Hamilton, or it wouldn't necessarily have to be in a particular location, but overall just kind of a shared sense of belongingness and identity that comes from being a part of that community. That makes it actually kind of sound kind of nice, kind of like you belong to something that's special in that way, which is a positive connotation. And of course, everyone wants to feel like they belong to something. At the same time, I think we need to emphasize that that kind of cultural dimension or social dimension also includes whatever kind of hierarchies or inequalities that we might see in a community as well. That even though there may be a sense of belonging, for some people, maybe not everyone else feels that same sense of belonging, or that they are excluded or isolated in some way. So you kind of got both sides of that people might feel those affinities, but they also might feel a sense of hierarchy, isolation, segregation, inequity that would be part of that dimension. It's also an important economic dimension to community. Many communities are built on systems of interdependency and exchange that are, in some cases, monetary, but it might be that there's systems of exchange that are outside kind of the traditional buyer and seller type markets, that when we buy a product at the grocery store or another shop or something like that, there could be ways in which people are dependent on each other, obviously because of jobs and employment, or more informal systems of exchange, such as bartering or favors and stuff like that, that are very based in social networks, but that might include important resources that we would share with each other. There's also important political definition of communities. So, for example, the Village of Hamilton has a very specific legal and political definition in New York state law that make it distinct from a city or a town or a county in terms of its status as a municipality. And so when we point to Hamilton, we can say, okay, we know what the boundary of that is legally, and there's a very kind of precise sense of that. The Village of Hamilton also has certain types of functions that are political. It has people who run for office as a mayor or a trustee, like I'm running for an election next week. You might have seen some of my signs around town that have my name on it. I'm actually running for village trustee. And so one of the things that Hamilton does is to administer certain services that are part of its mandate as a municipality, like bringing utility services like electricity and water and natural gas to different homes and businesses in town, has a police force, things like that, that help to enforce laws. So a really important dimension that defines communities, the politics. Then finally, we have kind of a place-based dimension. Many times communities are defined by geography, that you can not only draw up kind of a political map or a cultural map or an economic map, but a literal geographic map that says, here is where Hamilton is, or here is where some other community is. I guess you could say that there's some communities that are virtual, like you could have an online community of gamers or of people who share a certain hobby on a message board, but our kind of more everyday sense of community is that it's based in a particular place that has a geography, that has a climate and a landscape that define it and set the boundaries for it. And that's going to be really important for us because, again, we have a particular location where we're working in the town and village of Hamilton that do have a very particular climate that impacts things like climate change and our impacts from it, and how we can plan to be more resilient in response to those potential impacts. So these definitions for community are not a perfect map onto the three pillars for sustainability, but you probably see a lot of parallels here, right? We've got the social dimension, we've got the ecological dimension, we've got the economic dimension, and didn't really describe them in exactly the same way, but there's definitely a lot there that we can kind of say works in tandem. And so I think one of the things we can think about is how can we put those dimensions together for both community and sustainability to really help us understand the mission of this course, to engage with the community and try to address some kind of environmental issues and sustainability issues to help communities out. Looking at the ways that those dimensions dovetail with each other will help us kind of strategize and think about ways that we can work with communities to help achieve those goals. Now, we're actually fortunate that we have some real good tools that we can use for achieving those goals of supporting communities. And this week we're reading an article by Strand et al. On best practices of community-based research. So now let's talk a little bit more about that article and this idea of community-based research. I think one of the things to emphasize from the start is that community-based research is kind of meant to be an alternative or even a critique of traditional knowledge creation methods that are used in higher education in particular. So if you think about kind of like your classic model of what it means to do research, you think about work in a chemistry lab or in the social sciences doing some kind of survey or interview project that might involve a community, but it might not always be oriented towards the benefit of a community or collaboration with a community. A lot of research that's done involves community partners, but really more is just kind of like research subjects or guinea pigs. And there might be some long-term or more kind of broad and overarching goal for that research to ultimately benefit people, benefit society, benefit a specific community, but it might not be the first goal. It might not be the primary goal. So community-based research is in part a critique of that lack of attention to the community. And some of you have probably read another one of our classic hit articles in environmental studies by a scholar named Mackenzie Moore, who also criticizes higher education for not having a more direct focus on how to apply the results of research in specific community settings. So CBR, community-based research, is really meant to kind of turn that around and say, let's really put the community first, not only as a goal for our efforts for supporting them, but also as a real partner. So that when we actually do our research, we think about the community as a research partner that helps us do the work and helps drive the goals and things that we want to achieve from our research. So Strand et al., I think there's like 5 authors on this article, have a few different key points that they talk about that they say are the real principles as well as the benefits of community-based research. The first one being collaboration. In this sense, it's not a strong divide between the researcher and the researched, rather that the researchers, the teachers, the students, and the community members all work together and all kind of part of it, so that those boundaries become kind of blurry and break down, so that the researcher might themselves be a community member. The community member might be a researcher or a teacher too, and that they have important things to share and to teach us, and that we can learn as much from them as that they can learn from us. It's also about the democratization of knowledge, the idea that if we can have more people participating in the research process, we'll maybe learn things that we weren't thinking about in terms of how to approach a research question or topic, the methods to use, that we would be more open to that, and ultimately knowledge creation, what gets published, what gets disseminated, becomes a wider process where more people are involved. And it's better that way because more ideas, more diversity means more options, and we're not quite as narrow in terms of our focus, in terms of the disciplines that we know, the methods that we think are the best, and so forth, that we would be kind of a little bit more open to that and saying, yeah, let's try that. Let's see if that works, and allowing just a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we do our work. There's also a really important focus on social change and social justice, so that we support community needs, we help build capacity for those communities through the work that we're doing. And again, that's a collaborative process too, where we're going to say, okay, let's get together, let's try to change something, let's try to fix something that's a problem in our community. And in particular, if there are communities that are disadvantaged, have fewer resources, that we would help them through our research and really listen to them, that we don't come in saying, hey, we're researchers, we're here to save you. That mentality oftentimes not only makes it hard to get the attention of people, but it also means that we're not learning from them, we're not listening to them, we're not taking that more democratic approach. So that when we're focusing on social change and social justice, we don't necessarily assume that we know what the problem is. Maybe we say we want to help, but first we want to learn what the challenges really are before we just kind of assume that we know what we can do to help them out. Finally, educational advantages are a really important benefit of CBR in the arguments that Strand et al. Make. They say that students can really gain a different kind of knowledge through this process, not only in terms of how to do research and how to be a community member, but also just how to be citizens. That it helps to kind of learn some of the skills of citizenship when you actually work with a community. You see how it functions, you see the politics, the personalities, the culture, all those different aspects, dimensions of community that we talked about on the prior slide, that really helps you understand how to be a better community member yourself, in addition to how to do research. So we'll get some practice in this as we go along and as we start to actually do it in coming weeks. But I'll just say for now that one of the things I think that's really essential for community-based research is just to kind of take ourselves down a notch, to get off our pedestals and think, oh, we're up on the hill, we're in the ivory tower, and we're both, learning knowledge and creating knowledge, because that's what we do at a university. We need to kind of say, you don't necessarily need to be in a university to know things, to be able to figure out things, to do research even. There's a lot of different ways that we can achieve those goals. And so we kind of have to be humble and we have to listen, really be active listeners in terms of listening to the community and getting their perspective on all these different factors, how to be a good community member, how to be an equal participant and learn from them, how to focus on whatever problems these communities are facing, and ultimately to kind of have these win-wins where we support each other, we each get something out of it, but one side isn't really gaining more than the other, that we both kind of bring each other along in this research process. So wow, that sounds great, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound like an amazing ideal? And yeah, it does sound great. So the question is, are there challenges to actually achieving those ideals? What do you think, as a discussion question, we would maybe run into, or we're going to run into, as challenges to really following a CBR method in this course? Do you have any sense of, for your projects, the specific challenges you might face, or that more generally CBR-focused researchers might face in trying to follow through on the ideals that we get from the Strand article? That's something we'll talk about in class. See you then.